Most people don't know much about ancient Persia. In fact, we probably picture it more through movies and pop culture than from anything we learned in school. Rome, Greece, even Egypt. Those civilizations get plenty of attention. But what was going on in the East? That part of history often gets overlooked. And yet, ancient Persia was once the largest empire the world had ever seen. At its peak, nearly half the world's population lived under the rule of Persian kings. So, let's take a look back through a few centuries of Persian history and try to learn a little more, beyond what the textbooks usually cover. Where does our knowledge of the Persians actually come from? Mostly from three Greek writers, Herodotus, Xenophon, and Ctesias. But there's a catch. The Greeks were rivals of the Persians and didn't really understand their culture. A lot of what they wrote is biased, or just plain inaccurate. Even the names of Persian rulers come to us through a Greek filter, and they don't sound anything like they did in the original language. The Greek alphabet didn't even have letters for some Persian sounds. For example, Cyrus was actually Kurush, Darius was Darav, and Xerxes was Kayara. And they weren't really kings in the Greek sense. They were shahs. Luckily, we have more than just Greek accounts to rely on. One of the most valuable sources is the Royal Archive at Persepolis, which holds thousands of clay tablets written in cuneiform. These tablets are packed with economic records that give us a much clearer picture of how the Persian Empire really worked. The Persians, also known as the Parsa, were an Indo-Iranian people. Alongside their close relatives, the Medes, they migrated from the regions of modern-day Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan toward the richer lands of Mesopotamia at the end of the Bronze Age. They called themselves Ariana, a name that still echoes today in the word Iran. Interestingly, the word Pers in their language meant warrior or strong man. At the time, the Persians were pastoral nomads, but not in the way we typically imagine. They practiced vertical nomadism, moving with the seasons along mountain slopes. They spent summers in highland valleys and winters in the lower foothills, where the grass was lusher. This style of migration can still be seen in some regions of the Caucasus today. Their way of life was simple and rugged. They ate modestly, rarely drank alcohol, and were renowned horsemen. Unlike the people of Mesopotamia, the Persians wore trousers, ideal for riding, and distinctive pointed hats called tiaras. They also stood out physically from the native peoples of the Fertile Crescent, taller in stature and lighter in complexion. By the 7th century BC, the Persians began their remarkable rise to power. The Persians captured the Elamite city of Anshan, and from that point on, all Persian kings would begin their titles with King of Anshan. In the 6th century BC, Cyrus II came to power, the man who would later be known as Cyrus the Great. At the time, the Persians were still vassals of the Median Empire, but Cyrus led a rebellion against the Median king, Astyages. Several powerful Median clans, dissatisfied with Astyages' rule, defected to Cyrus. With their support, he defeated the Median army at the site of a decisive battle where Astyages' forces were crushed. After securing victory, Cyrus founded the city of Pasargadae, which would become the new capital of his growing empire. But Cyrus didn't stop after taking control of Media. He launched a rapid series of military campaigns, conquering Parthia, Armenia, Cappadocia, Elam, Lydia, and Ionia. Some regions, like Hyrcania and Cilicia, submitted to Persian rule voluntarily. With much of the region under his control, Cyrus turned his attention to the dominant superpower of Mesopotamia, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. According to legend, the Babylonian king Nabonidus had angered the chief god Marduk. It was said that Marduk turned to Cyrus and called on him to come to Babylon, depose Nabonidus, and take his place. In reality, when the Persian army approached Babylon, the gates were opened without a fight. The city's nobility, disillusioned with Nabonidus's rule, surrendered the city and welcomed Cyrus as a liberator. Cyrus proved to be not only a brilliant conqueror, but also a shrewd statesman. He treated conquered peoples with surprising leniency, provided they did not offer fierce resistance. Rather than ruling with an iron fist, Cyrus preferred to rely on local elites. Defeated kings were often spared, and even granted high-ranking positions within his empire. He generally avoided interfering in the internal affairs of subject nations. Where possible, local officials remained in their posts after conquest. This approach helped minimize resentment among the ruling classes and reduced the likelihood of rebellion. Cyrus also freed many peoples who had been displaced by the Babylonians and Assyrians. Among them were the Jews, whom he allowed to return to their homeland. He even provided funding for the reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem. This is why Cyrus is remembered with great respect in the Bible. The truth was, Persians made up only a small minority of the empire, roughly 1 in 20 subjects. So Cyrus could not rely on brute force to maintain control. Instead, he built a system based on tolerance, cooperation, and local autonomy. After conquering Babylon, Cyrus turned his attention northward to secure the borders of his empire from raids by the Scythian tribes. But this campaign would soon prove to be his last. The campaign would prove fatal. In a fierce battle against the Massagetae, led by Queen Tomiris, the Persian army was nearly wiped out, and Cyrus himself was killed in action. After his death, power passed to his son Cambyses. Almost immediately, many of the lands that Cyrus had conquered rose in rebellion. Cambyses spent the next few years on military campaigns to re-establish control over the fractured empire. Once order was restored, Cambyses launched an ambitious invasion of Egypt. He captured Memphis, took the pharaoh prisoner, and brought both Egypt and Libya under Persian rule. His next goals were even more ambitious. He planned to conquer Carthage and Kush. However, both campaigns met significant setbacks. The expedition into Kush failed due to severe supply shortages in the harsh desert terrain. Meanwhile, the invasion of Carthage was called off altogether because the Phoenicians, whose naval power was essential for the expedition, refused to fight against their fellow countrymen in Carthage. While Cambyses dealt with these challenges, another revolt erupted in Babylon. Cambyses set out to suppress the rebellion, but fell ill on the journey and died before he could return. Power was supposed to pass to his brother Smerdis, but a man named Darius stepped in. Darius claimed that the individual posing as Smerdis was actually an impostor, a magus named Gaumata, and that the real Smerdis had been secretly killed by Cambyses long before. Using this accusation, Darius seized the throne. However, Darius was not a direct descendant of Cyrus. To legitimize his rule, he declared himself a descendant of Achaemenes, the great-grandfather of Cyrus the Great. From that point forward, the royal line became known as the Achaemenid dynasty. Like Cambyses, Darius spent much of his early reign putting down revolts across the empire. He launched an unsuccessful military campaign against the Scythians north of the Black Sea, added Thrace to the empire, formed an alliance with Macedonia, and engaged in conflict with the Greeks. Though the Greco-Persian wars are a topic best saved for later. Darius is remembered less as a general, especially since he rarely led armies himself, and more as a great administrator. His legacy lies in the reforms and organization that helped shape the Persian Empire into one of the most advanced states of the ancient world. To improve governance, Darius divided the empire into provinces called satrapies, each overseen by a governor known as a satrap. Satraps held civilian authority. They managed infrastructure, maintained roads and military depots, collected taxes, and oversaw justice. Initially, satraps also had military power within their regions. However, after several satrap-led uprisings, Darius stripped them of their military control and placed all armies under direct central command to prevent future rebellions. To further consolidate power, Darius introduced a standardized currency system. The gold daric. 1 gold daric was worth 20 silver siglos, became the empire's dominant currency. While coins themselves weren't a Persian invention, having first appeared in Lydia, it was under Darius that coinage became widespread across the empire. Earlier in Lydia, the use of coins began, but it was under Darius that the concept of a universal medium of exchange spread widely across the Persian Empire. A Persian soldier's monthly pay was 1 darik, a gold coin. For context, a sheep cost about 3 sigloi, and a sack of flour around 2. This standardized currency system not only simplified trade, but also helped unify the economy across the vast empire. Darius also oversaw the construction of an extensive network of paved roads. These roads allowed for the rapid movement of troops, goods, and information across the empire, and significantly boosted overland trade. The most famous of these was the Royal Road, which connected the Aegean coast in Lydia to Susa, the ancient capital of Elam. Spanning over 1,500 miles, this road became the backbone of Persian logistics and communication. Based on this road network, the Persians developed an organized postal system. At regular intervals along these routes, relay stations were built. Thanks to this setup, messages could travel from one end of the empire to the other in just a few days, passed swiftly from one rider to the next. This system greatly enhanced the efficiency and cohesion of imperial governance. Darius also oversaw the construction of the first version of the Suez Canal. Although it didn't yet connect the Red Sea directly to the Mediterranean, it linked the Red Sea to one of the Nile Delta's branches. Even so, this engineering achievement enabled navigation between the two seas and provided a major boost to maritime trade and commerce. Monumental construction flourished throughout the empire during Darius's reign. He established Persepolis, located near Pasargadae, as the new ceremonial capital. In total, the Persian Empire had 5 major capitals: Cyrus's Pasargadae, Darius's Persepolis, the old Median capital Ecbatana, the Elamite city of Susa, and, of course, Babylon. Under Darius, Persepolis became the empire's grandest city, home to massive construction projects such as the Apadana, a grand audience hall. Craftsmen from all corners of the empire contributed to building elaborate structures, sculptures, and monuments. Just outside these cities, the Persians created lush gardens, known in their language as paridida. This word would later evolve into the modern term paradise. The backbone of the Persian army was the Immortals, an elite force of professional heavy infantry. These soldiers were clad in armor and armed with spears, swords, and bows. This unit always maintained a constant strength of 10,000 men. Whenever a soldier was killed, retired, or incapacitated, he was immediately replaced, keeping the number steady. However, the name Immortals may be a mistranslation of a Persian word meaning companions, though thanks to Herodotus, the term became widely used in historical literature. The Persian army's light infantry was composed of archers and slingers. Alongside them, the Persians fielded heavy cavalry with spears and light cavalry equipped with javelins. Depending on the region of conflict, they also deployed auxiliary troops drawn from the many peoples of the empire: Egyptians, Babylonians, Syrians, Jews, Greeks, and others. The Persians frequently relied on mercenaries, especially Greeks and Scythians. Persians are often labeled as fire worshippers, but that's not entirely accurate. They didn't worship fire itself. Their religion was an early form of Zoroastrianism, known as Mazdaism. Unlike modern Zoroastrianism, this version wasn't strictly monotheistic. The Persians did not deny the existence of other gods. They simply placed their god, Ahura Mazda, above all others. He was considered the god of gods, just as the Persian king was referred to as the king of kings, or Shahanshah in their language. Within Mazdaism itself, there were other divine figures: Mitra, the god of light and truth; Angra Mainyu, the spirit of evil, sometimes transliterated as Ahiman; Anahita, the goddess of fertility, and several others. This form of belief is known as henotheism, a system that acknowledges the existence of many gods while giving supremacy to one. Mazdaism was primarily the faith of the Persian and some Median elites. Importantly, the Persians never tried to impose their religion on the peoples they ruled. Their empire was remarkably tolerant of religious diversity. Babylonian Marduk, Jewish Yahweh, Egyptian Amun, and Greek Zeus all had a place under Persian rule. The Persians also had a curious tradition when it came to decision-making. According to their beliefs, rooted in Mazdaism, a person under the influence of alcohol could only speak the truth. So when facing an important decision, they would first discuss it while drunk. The next day, they would reconsider the idea while sober. If it still seemed like a good decision, it was approved. If not, the whole process would begin again. The Greco-Persian Wars began with a rebellion of the Greek colonies in Ionia. In 499 BC, the Ionian Greeks rose up against Persian rule. They were supported by Athens and by Greeks from the Aegean Islands. Not only did they overthrow Persian authority, but they even launched a bold raid on Sardis, the capital of the Lydian satrapy. The Greeks looted the city and set it ablaze, destroying, among other things, the temple of Anahita. The rebellion lasted 7 years before it was finally crushed by the Persians. In its aftermath, Persia sent envoys to many city-states across mainland and island Greece, offering a symbolic request for earth and water, a traditional gesture of submission to Persian rule. Many poleis accepted the offer, but the two most powerful, Athens and Sparta, refused. In Sparta, the envoys were thrown into a well and told to find their earth and water there. In Athens, they were put on trial and executed. This enraged the Persians, who began preparing a punitive expedition. The Persian army landed on a coastal plain near the city of Marathon. From there, they intended to march inland and destroy Athens. But upon landing, they were shocked to see a Greek force already assembled at the far end of the plain. At the far end of the plain, the Athenians had learned of the invasion and, rallying their allies, had marched to intercept the Persians. Despite outnumbering the Greeks by more than 2 to 1, the Persians found themselves in a disadvantageous position. The Marathon plain sloped upward, and the Greeks were positioned at the higher end. Any Persian attack would have to be launched uphill. The Persian commander, Artaphernus, hesitated, unwilling to advance from such a poor tactical position. Meanwhile, the Greek general, Miltiades, was also in no rush to engage. He had just received a messenger from Sparta and was waiting for reinforcements. Eventually, Artaphernus conceived a new plan. If the Athenian army was camped at Marathon, then Athens itself must be unprotected. He ordered a withdrawal to the ships, intending to sail around the coast and strike the city while it lay defenseless. At that critical moment, Miltiades made his move. He ordered a sudden and aggressive attack. The Persians, caught off guard while reorganizing for departure, were thrown into chaos. The Greek assault shattered their lines, and panic spread quickly through the Persian ranks. While many Persians managed to retreat to their ships and escape, the losses were devastating. About 7,000 elite troops and dozens of ships were lost. Greek casualties, by contrast, were minimal, around 150 men. Despite this defeat, King Darius did not abandon his plans for revenge. However, he never got the chance. First, a revolt in Egypt demanded his attention, and not long afterward, he died. His successor, Xerxes, took the throne and began preparations for a massive campaign against Greece. Greek historians later claimed that his army numbered 1 million men, though that figure is clearly exaggerated. Modern estimates suggest the force was closer to 200,000, still an enormous military presence for the time. The Greeks decided to make their stand at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, which at that time was only a few dozen meters wide. Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't just the famous 300 Spartans who defended the pass. Several thousand soldiers from other Greek city-states also took part. Nevertheless, the battle was eventually lost. The Greeks managed to hold the Persians off for 2 days. On the third day, most of the Greek forces withdrew, fearing encirclement. Only the Spartan contingent and a small number of allies chose to remain behind, numbering no more than 500 men. Against such overwhelming odds, they could not hold the pass. By the end of the day, they were completely surrounded and killed to the last man. Following this victory, the Persians advanced unopposed and reached Athens, only to find the city deserted. The women and children had been evacuated to the Peloponnesus, while the men had taken to the sea to confront the Persian navy. The two fleets met near the island of Salamis in what would become the decisive naval battle of the Greco-Persian Wars. The Battle of Salamis was the decisive naval clash of the Greco-Persian Wars. Although the Persians held the numerical advantage, their ships were smaller and lighter. The Greek fleet, composed mainly of heavy triremes, managed to lure the Persian navy into the narrow strait between Salamis and the mainland. Once inside, the Persians lost their key advantage: maneuverability. The heavier Greek triremes struck with full force, ramming and crushing the lighter Persian vessels. The Persian fleet was devastated, losing approximately a third of its ships and retreating in panic and disorder. With their navy shattered, the Persian army lost its primary supply line. Although the Persians burned Athens in frustration, they soon began a retreat toward the Hellespont. That retreat quickly devolved into a chaotic rout. Several more battles followed, both on land and at sea, most of which ended in Greek victories. Eventually, the Persians were forced to agree to peace. Under its terms, they relinquished control of all the Aegean islands and the coast of Asia Minor. Though defeated on the battlefield, the Persians did not abandon their long-held goal of influencing or dominating the Greek world. Instead, they changed tactics, turning from military conquest to cultural influence and bribery. Many prominent Greek figures, including the famed orator Demosthenes, accepted Persian gold in exchange for promoting certain ideas or political policies favorable to Persian interests. However, disaster for Persia would come not from Greece, but from an entirely unexpected direction. In the 4th century BC, King Philip II of Macedon united the Greek city-states under his rule and began preparing for a long-cherished dream: an invasion of Persia. But suddenly, he was assassinated, stabbed by his own bodyguard, Pausanias. The true motive for the assassination remains a mystery. Some believe Pausanias was in love with Philip's wife. Others suspect the Persians orchestrated the killing to eliminate a rising threat. Still others suggest Philip's son, Alexander, may have had a hand in it. The truth will likely never be known. One way or another, Philip was gone, and power passed to his 18-year-old son, Alexander. Alexander inherited a fully assembled invasion force, poised to strike eastward. and he wasted no time fulfilling his father's vision. Over the next 13 years, he swept through the Achaemenid Empire like a storm, never suffering a single defeat. The Persians had no effective answer to the Macedonian phalanx, a revolutionary military formation of the time, nor to Alexander's extraordinary tactical genius and uncanny luck. Time and again, he placed himself at the heart of the fiercest fighting, yet emerged with barely a scratch or only light wounds. By 329 BC, after more than 2 centuries of dominance, the Achaemenid Empire had ceased to exist. The Hellenistic Age had begun. But Persia's legacy did not vanish. It lived on and evolved, first within the Hellenistic Seleucid Empire, then in the Parthian kingdom, later under the Sasanian dynasty, and beyond. Even today, the Persian language survives. Despite the dominance of Islamic rule in modern Iran, there are still communities that preserve the ancient Persian faith. Zoroastrianism. The rise and fall of the Persian Empire teaches us that true power isn't built on fear or force alone. It's sustained by adaptability, tolerance, and vision. Cyrus the Great succeeded not by crushing others, but by embracing diversity, respecting traditions, and empowering local leaders. In today's world, whether leading a team, a business, or a community, the same principle applies. Respect earns loyalty, and cooperation builds lasting influence. If we want to lead well, we must balance strength with empathy and strategy with humility, just as the greatest Persian rulers once did. Lead with purpose, not domination.